My name is Peter Mezei, and I am one of the members of the consortium in reCreating Europe project. I also had the privilege to lead work package 2 on end users in the last, let's say, third part of this whole project. Work package 2 was dedicated to do very broad and comprehensive research on the interests and needs of end users. End users in the broadest sense, so those people who are relying on services which are dedicated for users of online platforms and other services. But more specifically, we were focusing on those end users who want to access to culture, various expressions of cultures, and within that, we will focus on two main groups of end users. One of the big groups was the vulnerable group of people, especially visually impaired people. The other group was a much more generalistic group of people, those who were interested in research materials. In another way, we also focused on end users' interest in how to rely on the services of various platforms. In other words, we approached the question from the platforms service providers' perspective as well. How much flexibility do they grant to end users? So we both focus on the rights of end users as well as the flexibilities granted by private actors of the industry. In our work, let's say the starting point was already something that everyone has spotted in the copyright, especially digital copyright ecosystem. This is something we usually call the need for a balance between the interests of stakeholders. We must stress that copyright law is rightfully dedicated to the high level of protection of copyright holders, those who generate content, especially authors. In reality, however, copyright is sheltering the interests of mainly intermediaries in our ages. And as a part of this shift towards the intermediary protection, we have spotted, at least we believe, we see it properly, that the interest of end users is fairly limited. In our research, we try to analyze this problem, and we also try to find the major points where we can add with meaningful research into the development of the interests of these users. In other words, we wanted to provide meaningful research on rebalancing the interests of end users. I think this word is very fairly in connection with the overall name of the whole project, which is called reCreating Europe. We believe in order to have a meaningful European copyright ecosystem, we slightly have to recreate or rebalance the interests of end users in this whole ecosystem, let's call that this way. Well, this is probably the point where we could spend a whole year on talking. I must immediately flag that as a part of our work package, we have produced a collection of recommendations in a very long, close to 70 pages policy document. We provided a very deep summary of our main findings, which culminated in a collection of approximately 30 recommendations. You might see 30 means there are a lot to do on this field. Again, let me try to recall that our focus was in multiple directions. We, on the one hand, focused in a general way on end users of whatever copyrighted content. We spotted that the existing copyright norms related to balancing mechanisms, so limitations and exceptions for the benefit of end users, is not necessarily up to date. For example, we recommend to update certain kind of limitations and exceptions, for example, to introduce expressis verbis, an e-lending exception, a lending of e-books by cultural organizations, especially libraries. We also urge to introduce a generalized research exception to the EU copyright system. As of now, the EU legal system regarding research activities is certain kind of patchwork. We shouldn't even forget that because the exceptions and limitations under EU copyright law are coming from directives. Directives have to be implemented by member states, and as such, it matters a lot how those member states, as of now 27 member states, have implemented the various provisions. And of course, our wonderful team in PISA has made an incredible amount of work to analyze each and every exception and limitation in the member states of the European Union, and they spotted that the exceptions related to research activities is at least in certain parts of the exceptions show serious differences in the various 27 member states. In other words, again, we both recommend to streamline various aspects of exceptions and limitations, and on the other hand, we recommend to completely rethink and renew the regime in other aspects. The other direction of our research was focused on vulnerable groups, especially visually impaired people. We have noticed at this point, the wonderful team from Maynooth, that there is a serious lack in the proper understanding as well as the proper expressions related to these groups of people. We urge, for example, as one of the most important recommendations in our research, to rethink and recalibrate the notion of disabilities per se. On the other hand, something I always like to mention, especially as a person coming from Hungary, speaking a very unique language, something that only 10, 15 million people speak all around the world, languages. We spotted that the protection and protection of languages per se, especially in the dimension of vulnerable groups, is of vital importance to have a balanced and equal European Union, equal type of protection within the European Union for these groups. The third layer of our research was focusing on, as I already indicated, on the flexibilities granted to end users by private actors, so external intermediaries, especially companies, by the way, with US origin. We looked at the exact wording of end-user license agreements. This was done mainly by the SEGET team, led by me. And at that point, we noticed that the end-user license agreements are quite limited in taking into consideration what public laws of the European Union include. We must, of course, say and clearly state that those new provisions of the European Union regarding intermediaries / end-user license agreements are coming from a directive which only entered into force in 2021, so quite recently. Nevertheless, we believe that we have found a few of those points where these agreements must be updated, amended, in order to guarantee broader protection or broader flexibilities for the end users in general. It's a very tough question. I believe there are a couple of issues we must flag. I'm not sure we can say all these issues are misconceptions, but let me introduce to you two of these things. One will be a general issue. The other one will be a very specific question. Now, what about the general one? I would say that when a legislation is willing to introduce new rules related to a big group of stakeholders, in this case, end users, of course, the rules must be as broad and as encompassing, as compact as possible in order to guarantee a general interpretation and application for these, for the members of this group. But this poses an issue. This poses maybe not a misconception, but slightly call it a problem. end users cannot be generalized. End users is such a broad and complex definition and group of people that it's almost inevitable that the rules for a certain subgroup of end users is completely irrelevant or inapplicable or badly applicable for another group of people. Again, to be a little bit more certain, we believe that are on the one hand end users. They are they are so special a group of people that they need special provisions. The same for researchers. We researchers at academia are, of course, end users, but we are certainly using contents for research purposes, research and educational purposes, in a way which definitely differs from from the activity of various other subgroups of end users. Nevertheless, the limitations and exceptions with respect to research activities are generalized. So in a certain way, we recommend to rethink how we approach the subgroups of end users in order to have the best available solution for these groups of people. If it comes to the special misconception or example for this topic, let me flag something which comes from the research we have done with respect to end user license agreements. These end user license agreements, also reflecting my previous statement, try to generalize the situation, tries to give the best available language for everyone. And here everyone means millions of people from all around the globe. But laws and general understanding of laws can seriously differ in various countries, and therefore terms and various expressions that these end user license agreements might include can be understood and applied completely differently, both in general language and by courts. Let's use the exact example I wanted to flag. Many of the intermediaries that are offering contents online offer contents for sale, purchase. The problem here is that in a digital environment, not necessarily all countries interpret online sales as transfer of ownership over goods. As such, whatever the term and conditions says, hypothetically, courts can overrule that language and can conclude that the agreement that the parties concluded is completely different from the language stipulated by the terms and conditions. To be short here, this can seriously lead to misunderstanding or misconceptions among end users. We also urged in this research to try to make it clear. I actually try to use language which is clear enough for end users in order to have the proper understanding of law and in order to make proper decisions with respect to intermediary services. I would say we have a lot of other things to flag, but at this point, I think I should be short and only flag these 2 points. Okay, well, in multiple places. Let me start with the most evident on reCreating Europe's website. If you just visit reCreating Europe's website, you will see that there are a lot of functionalities. Among these functionalities, we also listed our outputs. If you just click on the results of our research, you will see that, well, we have a lot. It's, of course, not only for work package 2, for the rest of the reCreating Europe as well, but you will see that we have policy recommendations, we have case studies, we have also training materials. So we had a lot of outputs in the last 3 years that we are publicly sharing with people over the website of reCreating through Zenodo. So these are completely open access. These are completely available for everyone. Of course, we also did scientific research. We also have peer-reviewed articles on this field. Needless to say, we also plan to continue further output with research papers as well as books. We also presented on multiple conferences from which I believe you can find various recordings on YouTube or other places. But of course, I can only recommend to dig into deeper details and try to look for those researchers, the names of these researchers, their institutes who have contributed to Work Package 2, Mainus, PISA, Szeged. We also collaborated with other partners, of course, at other universities like Trento and, of course, Amsterdam, of course, Glasgow. These people have certainly a lot to say other than those that were incorporated in the work package results of work package 2 on end users in reCreating Europe. So I can only recommend you, if you are interested in end users in general or in specific sub-questions as indicated earlier to you, dig into the details, start the research on our website, and you will find a lot to see, read, and continue research on.